2 Kings, chapter 1. After Ahab's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. Ahaziah had fallen from the balcony of his upper room in Samaria, and was lying ill. So he sent messengers, saying to them, "Go and consult Baal-zebub god of Ekron, and ask whether I shall recover from my illness." But the angel of Yahweh said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Up, go and intercept the king of Samaria's messengers. Say to them, Is there no God in Israel, for you to go and consult Baal-zebub god of Ekron? Yahweh says this, You will never leave the bed you have got into. You are certainly going to die." And Elijah set out. The messengers returned to the king, who said, "Why have you come back?" "A man came to meet us," they answered. He said, "Go back to the king who sent you and tell him, Yahweh says this, Is there no God in Israel, for you to go and consult Baal-zebub god of Ekron? For this, you will never leave the bed you have got into. You are certainly going to die." He said, "This man who met you and said all this, what was he like?" "A man wearing a hair cloak," they answered, "and a leather loincloth." "It was Elijah the Tishbite," he said. He then sent a captain of 50 soldiers with his 50 men to Elijah, whom they found sitting on top of a hill. The captain went up to him and said, "Man of God, the king says, come down." Elijah answered the captain, "If I am a man of God, may fire fall from heaven and destroy both you and your 50 men." And fire fell from heaven and destroyed him and his 50 men. The king sent a second captain of 50 to him, again with 50 men, and he too went up and said, "Man of God, this is the king's order, come down at once." Elijah answered them, "If I am a man of God, may fire fall from heaven and destroy both you and your 50 men." And lightning fell from heaven and destroyed him and his 50 men. The king then sent a third captain of 50 to him, with another 50 men. The third captain of 50 came up to Elijah, fell on his knees before him and pleaded with him. "Man of God," he said, "may my life and the lives of these 50 servants of yours count for something in your eyes. Fire has fallen from heaven and destroyed 2 captains of 50s and their companies. But this time may my life count for something in your eyes." The angel of Yahweh said to Elijah, "Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him." He rose and accompanied him down to the king, and said to him, "Yahweh says this, Since you sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub god of Ekron, you will never leave the bed you have got into. You are certainly going to die." And, in accordance with the word of Yahweh which Elijah had uttered, he died. Since he had no son, his brother Jehoram succeeded him, in the 2nd year of Jehoram son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. The rest of the history of Ahaziah, and his career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Second Kings, chapter 2. This is what happened when Yahweh took Elijah up to heaven in the whirlwind. Elijah and Elisha set out from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, "You stay here, for Yahweh is only sending me to Bethel." But Elisha replied, "As Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And they went down to Bethel. The brotherhood of prophets living at Bethel came out to meet Elisha and said, "Do you know that Yahweh will carry your lord and master away today?" "Yes, I know," he said, "be quiet." Elijah said, "Elisha, you stay here. Yahweh is only sending me to Jericho." But he replied, "As Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And they went on to Jericho. The brotherhood of prophets living at Jericho went up to Elisha and said, "Do you know that Yahweh will carry your lord and master away today?" "Yes, I know," he said, "be quiet." Elijah said, "Elisha, you stay here. Yahweh is only sending me to the Jordan." But he replied, "As Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And they went on together. 50 of the brotherhood of prophets followed them, halting some distance away as the 2 of them stood beside the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up and struck the water, and the water divided to left and right, and the 2 of them crossed over dry shod. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Make your request. What can I do for you before I am snatched away from you?" Elisha answered, "Let me inherit a double share of your spirit." "Your request is difficult," Elijah said. "If you see me while I am being snatched away from you, it will be as you ask. If not, it will not be so." Now as they walked on, talking as they went, a chariot of fire appeared and horses of fire coming between the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in the whirlwind. Elisha saw it and shouted, "My father! My father! Chariot of Israel and its chargers!" Then he lost sight of him, and taking hold of his own clothes he tore them in half. He picked up Elijah's cloak which had fallen, and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took Elijah's cloak and struck the water. "Where is Yahweh, the God of Elijah?" he cried. As he struck the water it divided to right and left, and Elisha crossed over. The brotherhood of prophets saw him in the distance, and said, "The spirit of Elijah has come to rest on Elisha." They went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. "Look," they said, "your servants have 50 strong men with them. Let them go and look for your master. The spirit of Yahweh may have taken him up and thrown him down on a mountain or into a valley." "Send no one," he replied. But they so shamed him with their insistence that he consented. So they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days without finding him. They then came back to Elisha, who had stayed in Jericho. He said, "Didn't I tell you not to go?" The people of the city said to Elisha, "The city is pleasant to live in, as my lord indeed can see, but the water is foul and the country suffers from miscarriages. Bring me a new bowl," he said, "and put some salt in it." They brought it to him. Then he went to the source of the water, threw salt into it and said, "Yahweh says this, I make this water wholesome. Neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it any more." And the water became wholesome, as it is today, exactly as Elisha had said it would. From there he went up to Bethel, and while he was on the road, some small boys came out of the town and jeered at him. "Hurry up, Baldy," they shouted. "Come on up, Baldy." He turned round and looked at them, and he cursed them in the name of Yahweh. And 2 bears came out of the forest and savaged 42 of the boys. From there he went on to Mount Carmel and then returned to Samaria. 2 Kings, chapter 3. Jehoram son of Ahab became king of Israel in Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and reigned for 12 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, though not like his father and mother, for he did away with the pillar to Baal which his father had made. Nonetheless, he continued to practice the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel and did not give them up. Mesha king of Moab was a sheep breeder and used to pay the king of Israel in tribute 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams with their wool. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. At once King Jehoram left Samaria and mustered all Israel. After this he sent word to the king of Judah, "The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go to war with me against Moab?" "I will," he replied. "I will be as you, my men as yours, my horses as yours," and added, "Which way are we to attack?" "Through the desert of Edom," the other answered. So they set out, the king of Israel, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom. They carried out a flanking movement for 7 days, until there was no water left for the troops or for the beasts of their baggage train. "Alas!" the king of Israel exclaimed, "Yahweh has summoned us 3 kings, only to put us into the power of Moab." But the king of Judah said, "Is there no prophet of Yahweh here for us to consult Yahweh through him?" One of the king of Israel's servants answered, "Elisha son of Shaphat is here, who used to pour water on the hands of Elijah." "The word of Yahweh is with him," the king of Judah said. So the king of Israel, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom went to consult him. But Elisha said to the king of Israel, "What business have you with me? Go to your father's and your mother's prophets." "No," the king of Israel answered. "Yahweh is the one who has summoned us 3 kings. only to put us into the power of Moab." Elisha replied, "By the life of Yahweh Sabaoth whom I serve, if I did not respect the king of Judah, I would take no notice of you, nor so much as look at you. Now bring me someone who can play the lyre." And as the musician played, the hand of Yahweh came on him, and he said, "Yahweh says this, dig in this valley ditch after ditch. For Yahweh says, you will see no wind, you will see no rain, but this valley will become full of water, and you and your troops and your baggage animals will drink. But this is only a trifle in Yahweh's eyes, for he will put Moab itself into your power. You will storm every fortified town, fell every productive tree, block every waterhole, ruin all the best fields with stones." Next morning at the time when the oblation was being offered, water came from the direction of Edom, and the whole terrain was flooded. When the Moabites learned that the kings were advancing to fight them, all those of an age to bear arms were mobilized. They took up position on the frontier. In the morning when they got up, the sun was shining on the water, and in the distance the Moabites saw the water as red as blood. "This is blood," they said. "The kings must have fought among themselves and killed one another. So now for the booty, Moab." But when they reached the Israelite camp, the Israelites launched their attack, and the Moabites fled before them, and as they advanced they cut the Moabites to pieces. They laid the towns in ruins, and each man threw a stone into all the best fields to fill them up, and they blocked every water hole and felled every productive tree. In the end, there was only Kir Hareseth left, which the slingers surrounded and bombarded. When the king of Moab saw that the battle had turned against him, he mustered 700 swordsmen in the hope of breaking a way out and going to the king of Aram, but he failed. Then he took his eldest son who was to succeed him and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. Alarmed at this, the Israelites withdrew and retired to their own territory. Second Kings, chapter 4. The wife of a member of the prophetic brotherhood appealed to Elisha. "Your servant my husband is dead," she said, "and you know how your servant revered Yahweh. A creditor has now come to take my 2 children and make them his slaves." Elisha said, "What can I do for you? Tell me, what have you got in the house?" "Your servant has nothing in the house," she replied, "except a flask of oil." Then he said, "Go outside and borrow jars from all your neighbors, empty jars and not too few. When you come back, shut the door on yourself and your sons, and pour the oil into all these jars, putting each aside when it is full." So she left him, and she shut the door on herself and her sons. They passed to the jars, and she went on pouring. When the jars were full, she said to her son, "Pass me another jar." "There are no more," he replied. Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, who said, "Go and sell the oil and redeem your pledge. You and your children can live on the remainder." One day as Elisha was on his way to Shunem, a woman of rank who lived there pressed him to stay and eat there. After this he always broke his journey for a meal when he passed that way. She said to her husband, "Look, I am sure the man who is constantly passing our way must be a holy man of God. Let us build him a small walled room, and put him a bed in it, and a table and chair and lamp. Whenever he comes to us he can rest there." One day when he came, he retired to the upper room and lay down. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Call our Shunammite." He called her, and when she appeared, Elisha said, "Tell her this, look, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What can we do for you? Is there anything you would like said for you to the king or to the commander of the army?" But she replied, "I live with my own people about me." "What can I do for you then?" he asked. Gehazi replied, "Well, she has no son and her husband is old." Elisha said, "Call her." The servant called her, and she stood at the door. "This time next year," he said, "you will hold a son in your arms." But she said, "No, my lord, do not deceive your servant." But the woman did conceive, and she gave birth to a son at the time that Elisha had said she would. The child grew up. One day he went to his father who was with the reapers, and exclaimed to his father, "Oh, my head! My head!" The father told a servant to carry him to his mother. He lifted him up and took him to his mother, and the boy lay on her lap until midday, when he died. She went upstairs, laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door on him and went out. She called her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants with a donkey. I must hurry to the man of God and back." "Why go to him today?" he asked. "It is not new moon or Sabbath." But she replied, "Never mind." She had the donkey saddled and said to her servant, "Lead on, go. Do not draw rein until I give the order." She set off and made her way to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her in the distance, he said to his servant Gehazi, "Look, here comes our Shunammite. Now run and meet her and ask her, 'Are you well? Is your husband well? Your child well?'" "Yes," she replied. When she came to the man of God there on the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi stepped forward to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her. There is bitterness in her soul, and Yahweh has hidden it from me. He has not told me." She said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Don't deceive me'?" Elisha said to Gehazi, "Hitch up your clothes, take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. If anyone greets you, do not answer him. You are to stretch out my staff over the child." But the child's mother said, "As Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." Then he stood up and followed her. Gehazi had gone ahead of them and had stretched out the staff over the child, but there was no sound or response. He went back to meet Elisha and told him, "The child has not woken up," he said. Elisha then went to the house, and there on his bed lay the child, dead. He went in and shut the door on the two of them and prayed to Yahweh. Then he climbed onto the bed and stretched himself on top of the child, putting his mouth on his mouth, his eyes to his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and as he lowered himself onto him, the child's flesh grew warm. Then he got up and walked to and fro inside the house, and then climbed onto the bed again and lowered himself onto the child 7 times in all. Then the child sneezed and opened his eyes. He then summoned Gehazi. "Call our Shunammite," he said. He called her. When she came to him, he said, "Pick up your son." She went in and, falling at his feet, prostrated herself on the floor and then picked up her son and went out. Elisha went back to Gilgal while there was famine in the country. As the brotherhood of prophets were sitting with him, he said to his servant, "Put the large pot on the fire and cook some soup for the brotherhood." One of them went into the fields to gather herbs and came on some wild vine, off which he gathered enough gourds to fill his lap. On his return, he cut them up into the pot of soup. They did not know what they were. They then poured the soup out for the men to eat. But they had no sooner tasted the soup than they cried, "Man of God, there is death in the pot," and they could not eat it. "Bring some meal then," Elisha said. This he threw into the pot, and said, "Pour out, for the company to eat." And there was nothing harmful in the pot. A man came from Baal-Shalisha, bringing the man of God bread from the firstfruits, 20 barley loaves and fresh grain still in the husk. "Give it to the company to eat," Elisha said. But his servant replied, "How can I serve this to 100 men?" "Give it to the company to eat," he insisted. "For Yahweh says this, they will eat and have some left over." He served them. They ate and had some left over, as Yahweh had said. Second Kings, chapter 5. Naaman, army commander to the king of Aram, was a man who enjoyed his master's respect and favor, since through him Yahweh had granted victory to the Arameans. But the man suffered from a virulent skin disease. Now, on one of their raids into Israelite territory, the Arameans had carried off a little girl, who became a servant of Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would approach the prophet of Samaria, he would cure him of his skin disease." Naaman went and told his master. "This and this," he reported, "is what the girl from Israel has said." "Go by all means," said the king of Aram. "I shall send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 festal robes. He presented the letter to the king of Israel. It read, "With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you for you to cure him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes. "Am I a god to give death and life," he said, "for him to send a man to me and ask me to cure him of his skin disease? Listen to this and take note of it and see how he intends to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent word to the king, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, and he will find there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his team and chariot and drew up at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent him a messenger to say, "Go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will become clean once more." But Naaman was indignant and went off, saying, "Here was I, thinking he would be sure to come out to me, and stand there, and call on the name of Yahweh his God, and wave his hand over the spot and cure the part that was diseased. Surely Abana and Parpar, the rivers of Damascus, are better than any water in Israel? Could I not bathe in them and become clean?" And he turned round and went off in a rage. But his servants approached him and said, "Father, if the prophet had asked you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? All the more reason, then, when he says to you, 'Bathe, and you will become clean.'" So he went down and immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, as Elisha had told him to do. And his flesh became clean once more like the flesh of a little child. Returning to Elisha with his whole escort, he went in and, presenting himself, said, "Now I know that there is no God anywhere on earth except in Israel. Now, please, accept a present from your servant." But Elisha replied, "As Yahweh lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing." Naaman pressed him to accept, but he refused. Then Naaman said, "Since your answer is no, allow your servant to be given as much earth as 2 mules may carry, since your servant will no longer make burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god except Yahweh. Only, and may Yahweh forgive your servant for this, when my master goes to the temple of Rimmon to worship there, he leans on my arm, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon when he does. May Yahweh forgive your servant for doing this." "Go in peace," Elisha replied. Naaman had gone a small distance, when Gehazi, Elisha's servant, said to himself, "My master has let this Aramean Naaman off lightly, by not accepting what he offered. As Yahweh lives, I will run after him and get something out of him." So Gehazi set off in pursuit of Naaman. When Naaman saw him running after him, he jumped down from his chariot to meet him. "Is all well?" he asked. "All is well," he said. "My master has sent me to say, this very moment 2 young men of the prophetic brotherhood have arrived from the highlands of Ephraim. Be kind enough to give them a talent of silver and 2 festal robes." "Please accept 2 talents, Naaman replied, and pressed him, tying up the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with the 2 festal robes and consigning them to 2 of his servants who carried them ahead of Gehazi. When he reached Ophel, he took these from them and put them away in the house. He then dismissed the men who went away. He, for his part, went and presented himself to his master. Elisha said, "Gehazi, where have you been?" "Your servant has not been anywhere," he replied. But Elisha said to him, "Was not my heart present there when someone left his chariot to meet you? Now you have taken the money, you can buy gardens with it, and olive groves, sheep and oxen, male and female slaves. But Naaman's disease of the skin will cling to you and your descendants forever." And Gehazi left his presence white as snow from skin disease. 2 Kings, chapter 6. The brotherhood of prophets said to Elisha, "Look, the place where we are living with you is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, then, and each of us cut a beam there, and we will make our living quarters there." He replied, "Go. Be good enough to go with your servants," one of them said. "I will go," he replied, and went with them. On reaching the Jordan, they began cutting down timber. But as one of them was felling his beam, the iron axe head fell into the water. "Alas, my lord," he exclaimed, "and it was a borrowed one too." "Where did it fall?" the man of God asked, and he showed him the spot. Then, cutting a stick, Elisha threw it in at that point and made the iron axe head float. "Lift it out," he said, and the man stretched out his hand and took it. The king of Aram was at war with Israel. He conferred with his officers and said, "You must attack at such and such a place." Elisha, however, sent word to the king of Israel, "Be on your guard about such and such a place, because the Arameans are going to attack it." The king of Israel accordingly sent men to the place which Elisha had named. And he kept warning the king, and the king stayed on the alert. And this happened more than once or twice. The king of Aram grew very much disturbed over this. He summoned his officers and said, "Tell me which of you is betraying us to the king of Israel." "No one, my lord king," one of his officers replied. "It is Elisha, the prophet in Israel. The words you utter in your bedchamber, he reveals to the king of Israel." "Go and find out where he is," the king said, "so that I can send people to capture him." Word was brought to him, "He is now in Dothan." So he sent horses and chariots there, and a large force, and these, arriving during the night, surrounded the town. Next day, Elisha got up early and went out, and there surrounding the town was an armed force with horses and chariots. "Oh, my lord," his servant said, "what are we to do?" "Do not be afraid," he replied, "for there are more on our side than on theirs." And Elisha prayed. "Yahweh," he said, "open his eyes and make him see." Yahweh opened the servant's eyes, and he saw the mountain covered in fiery horses and chariots surrounding Elisha. As the Arameans came down towards him, Elisha prayed to Yahweh, "I beg you to strike these people sun-blind." And at Elisha's word, he struck them sun-blind. Then Elisha said to them, "This is not the road, nor is this the town. Follow me. I shall lead you to the man you are looking for." But he led them to Samaria. As they entered Samaria, Elisha said, "Yahweh, open these people's eyes, and let them see." Yahweh opened their eyes, and they saw. They were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "Shall I kill them, father?" "Do not kill them," he replied. "Do you kill your own prisoners with sword and bow? Offer them food and water, so that they can eat and drink, and then let them go back to their master." So the king provided a great feast for them, and when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them off and they went back to their master. Aramean raiding parties never invaded the territory of Israel again. It happened after this that Ben-Hadad king of Aram, mustering his whole army, marched on and laid siege to Samaria. In Samaria there was great famine, and so strict was the siege that the head of a donkey sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 cab of wild onions for 5 shekels of silver. Now as the king was passing along the city wall, a woman shouted, "Help, my lord king!" "If Yahweh does not help you," he retorted, "where can I find help for you? From the threshing floor? From the winepress?" Then the king asked, "What is the matter?" "This woman here," she answered, "said to me, 'Give up your son. We will eat him today and eat my son tomorrow.' So we cooked my son and ate him. Next day, I said to her, 'Give up your son for us to eat.' But she has hidden her son." On hearing the woman's words, the king tore his clothes. The king was walking on the wall, and the people saw that underneath he was wearing sackcloth next his body. "May God bring unnamable ills on me, and worse ills too," he said, "if the head of Elisha son of Shaphat remains on his shoulders today." Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before the man arrived, Elisha had said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has given orders to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door, hold the door against him. Isn't that the sound of his master's step behind him?" He was still actually speaking when the king arrived and said, "This misery plainly comes from Yahweh. Why should I still trust in Yahweh?" Second Kings, chapter 7. "Listen to the word of Yahweh," Elisha said. Yahweh says this, "By this time tomorrow a measure of finest flour will sell for 1 shekel, and 2 measures of barley for 1 shekel, at the gate of Samaria." The equerry on whose arm the king was leaning retorted to Elisha, "Even if Yahweh made windows in the sky, could this word come true?" "You will see it with your own eyes," Elisha replied, "though you will eat none of it." Now at the entrance to the gate, for they were afflicted with virulent skin disease, there were 4 men, and they debated among themselves, "Why sit here waiting for death? If we decide to go into the city, what with the famine in it, we shall die there. If we stay where we are, we shall die just the same. Come on, let us go over to the Aramean camp. If they spare our lives, we live. If they kill us, well, then we die." So at dusk they set out and made for the Aramean camp. But when they reached the confines of the camp, there was not a soul there. For Yahweh had caused the Arameans in their camp to hear a noise of chariots and horses, the noise of a great army, and they had said to one another, "Listen, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings against us, to attack us." So in the dusk they had made off and fled, abandoning their tents, their horses and their donkeys. Leaving the camp just as it was, they had fled for their lives. The men with skin disease, then, reached the confines of the camp. They went into one of the tents and ate and drank, and from it carried off silver and gold and clothing. These they took and hid. Then they came back and, entering another tent, looted it too, and took and hid their booty. Then they said to one another, "We are doing wrong. This is a day of good news, yet we are holding our tongues. If we wait till morning, we shall certainly be punished. Come on, let us go and take the news to the palace." Off they went and shouted out to the guards on the city gate, "We have been to the Aramean camp. There was not a soul there, no sound of anyone, only tethered horses and tethered donkeys, and their tents just as they were." The gatekeepers shouted the news, which was reported inside the palace. The king got up while it was still dark and said to his officers, "I can tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the open country. They will come out of the city. They think, we shall catch them alive and get into the city." One of his officers replied, 5 of the surviving horses still left us had better be taken. They would die in any case like all the rest. Let us send them and see." So they took 2 chariot teams, and the king sent them after the Aramean army, saying, "Go and see." They followed them as far as the Jordan, finding the whole way strewn with clothes and gear which the Arameans had thrown away in their panic. The scouts returned and informed the king. Then the people went out and plundered the Aramean camp. A measure of finest flour sold for 1 shekel, and 2 measures of barley for 1 shekel, as Yahweh had promised they would. The king had detailed the equerry, on whose arm he leaned, as commander of the guard on the gate. But the people trampled on him in the gateway, and he died, as the man of God had foretold when the king had come down to him. What Elisha had said to the king came true. 2 measures of barley will sell for 1 shekel, and a measure of finest flour for 1 shekel, by this time tomorrow at the gate of Samaria. And the equerry in question had replied to the man of God, "Even if Yahweh made windows in the sky, could this word come true?" "You will see it with your own eyes," Elisha had answered, "though you will eat none of it." And that was what happened to him. For the people trampled on him in the gateway, and he died. Second Kings, chapter 8. Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had raised to life, "Move away with your family, and live where you can in some foreign country. For Yahweh has called up a famine. It is already coming on the country, for 7 years. The woman hurried to do what the man of God had told her. She set out, she and her family, and for 7 years she lived in Philistine territory. When the 7 years were over, the woman returned from Philistine territory and went to lodge a claim with the king for her house and land. Now the king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. "Tell me," he was saying, "all about the marvels which Elisha did." Gehazi was just telling the king how Elisha had raised the dead child to life, when the woman whose son Elisha had raised lodged her claim with the king for her house and land. "My lord king," Gehazi said, "this is the very woman, and that is her son whom Elisha raised to life." The king questioned the woman, who told him the story. The king then delegated one of the officials to her with this order: "See that all her property is restored to her, and all the revenue from her land from the day she left the country until now." Elisha went to Damascus. Ben-Hadad king of Aram was ill, and was told, "The man of God has come all the way to us." Then the king said to Hazael, "Take a present with you and go and meet the man of God. Consult Yahweh through him, and find out if I shall recover from my illness." So Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking with him as a present the best that Damascus could offer, a load for 40 camels. He arrived and, presenting himself, said, "Your son Ben-Hadad king of Aram has sent me to ask you, shall I recover from my illness?" Elisha replied, "Go and tell him, you might recover, though Yahweh has shown me that he will certainly die." Then the face of the man of God went rigid, and his look grew strangely fixed, and he wept. "Why," Hazael asked, "does my lord weep?" "Because I know," Elisha replied, "what harm you will do to the Israelites. You will burn down their fortresses, put their picked warriors to the sword, dash their little children to pieces, disembowel their pregnant women. But what is your servant?" Hazael said, "How could this dog achieve anything so great?" In a vision from Yahweh, Elisha replied, "I have seen you, king of Aram." Leaving Elisha, Hazael went back to his master, who asked, "What did Elisha say to you?" He replied, "He told me that you might recover." Next day he took a blanket, soaked it in water, and spread it over his face. So died Ben-Hadad, and Hazael succeeded him. In the 5th year of Jehoram son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoram son of Jehoshaphat became king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 8 years in Jerusalem. He followed the example of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab were doing. He had married one of Ahab's daughters, and he did what is displeasing to Yahweh. But Yahweh was unwilling to destroy Judah because of his servant David, and was faithful to the promise which he had made him to leave him a lamp forever in his presence. In his time, Edom threw off the domination of Judah and set up a king for itself. Jehoram crossed to Zair, and with him all the chariots. Under cover of dark, he and his chariot commanders broke through the Edomites surrounding him. The people fled to their tents. Even so, Edom threw off the domination of Judah, remaining free to the present day. Libnah also revolted at that time. The rest of the history of Jehoram, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Then Jehoram fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried with them in the city of David. His son Ahaziah succeeded him. In the 12th year of Jehoram son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ahaziah son of Jehoram, king of Judah, became king. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, granddaughter of Omri king of Israel. He followed the example of the house of Ahab and did what is displeasing to Yahweh, as the house of Ahab were doing, to whom he was related by marriage. He went with Jehoram son of Ahab to make war on Hazael king of Aram at Ramoth in Gilead. But the Arameans wounded Jehoram. King Jehoram returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which he had received at Ramah, fighting against Hazael king of Aram. Ahaziah son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to Jezreel to visit Jehoram son of Ahab because he was ailing. 2 Kings, chapter 9. The prophet Elisha summoned a member of the prophetic brotherhood to him. "Hitch up your clothes, take this flask of oil, and go to Ramoth in Gilead. When you arrive there, look for Jehu son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Then, when you find him, tell him to get up and leave his companions, and take him into an inner room. Take the flask of oil then and pour it over his head, and say, 'Yahweh says this, I have anointed you king of Israel.' Then open the door and flee as fast as you can." The young man left for Ramoth in Gilead, and when he arrived, found the senior officers of the army sitting together. "I have a message for you, commander," he said. "For which of us?" asked Jehu. "For you, commander," he answered. Jehu then got up and went into the house. And the young man poured the oil on his head, saying, "Yahweh, God of Israel, says this, I have anointed you king of Yahweh's people, of Israel. You will strike down the family of Ahab your master, and I shall avenge the blood of my servants the prophets and all of Yahweh's servants, on Jezebel and on the whole family of Ahab. I shall destroy every manjack of Ahab's family, fettered or free in Israel. I shall make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat and of Baasha son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, the dogs will eat her in the field of Jezreel. No one will bury her." With this, he opened the door and made his escape. Jehu came out to his master's officers. "Is all well?" they asked him. "Why did this madman come to you?" "You know the fellow and how he talks," he answered. "Evasion," they cried, "come on, tell us." He replied, "He said this and that to me. He said, Yahweh says this, I have anointed you king of Israel." Whereupon they all took their cloaks and spread them unto him on the bare steps. They sounded the trumpet and shouted, "Jehu is king." Jehu son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, plotted against Jehoram. At the time, Jehoram, with all Israel, was holding Ramoth in Gilead against an attack by Hazael king of Aram. But King Jehoram had gone back to Jezreel to recover from the wounds which he had received from the Arameans while he was fighting against Hazael king of Aram. "If you agree," Jehu said, "let no one leave the town to go and take the news to Jezreel." Jehu then mounted his chariot and left for Jezreel. Jehoram had taken to his bed there, and Ahaziah king of Judah had gone down to visit him. The lookout posted on the tower of Jezreel saw Jehu's troop approaching. "I can see a body of men," he shouted. Jehoram gave the order, "Have a horseman sent to meet them and ask, Is all well?" The horseman went to meet Jehu and said, "The king says, Is all well? What has it to do with you whether all is well?" Jehu replied, "Fall in behind me." The lookout reported, "The messenger has reached them and is not coming back." The king sent a second horseman who reached them and said, "The king says, Is all well? What has it to do with you whether all is well?" Jehu replied, "Fall in behind me." The lookout reported, "He has reached them and is not coming back." The manner of driving is like that of Jehu son of Nimshi. He drives like a madman. "Harness!" Jehoram cried. And they harnessed his chariot. Then Jehoram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah, each in his chariot, set out to meet Jehu. They reached him in the field of Naboth of Jezreel. As soon as Jehoram saw Jehu, he asked, "Is all well, Jehu?" "What a question," he replied, "when all the while the prostitutions and countless sorceries of your mother Jezebel go on." At this, Jehoram wheeled and fled, saying to Ahaziah, "Treason, Ahaziah!" But Jehu had drawn his bow. He struck Jehoram between the shoulder blades. The arrow went through the king's heart, and he sank down in his chariot. "Pick him up," Jehu said to Bidkar, his equerry, "and throw him into the field of Naboth of Jezreel. Remember how, when you and I manned a chariot together behind Ahab his father, Yahweh pronounced this sentence against him, 'This I swear,
Yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons. Yahweh says this,
And in this same field I shall requite you. Yahweh says this. So pick him up, and throw him into the field, as Yahweh declared should happen. When Ahaziah king of Judah saw this, he fled along the Beth-Hagon road, but Jehu went in pursuit of him. Strike him down too, he said. And they wounded him in his chariot at the slope of Gur, which is near Ibleam, and he took refuge in Megiddo, where he died. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb in the city of David. Ahaziah had become king of Judah in the 11th year of Jehoram son of Ahab. When Jehu went back to Jezreel, Jezebel was told. She made up her eyes with mascara, adorned her head, and appeared at the window. As Jehu came through the gateway, she said, How did Zimri get on after killing his master? Jehu looked up to the window and said, Who is on my side? And 2 or 3 officials looked down at him. Throw her down, he said. They threw her down, and her blood spattered the walls and the horses, and Jehu rode over her. He went in and ate and drank, then said, See to this accursed woman, and give her burial. After all, she was a king's daughter. But when they went to bury her, they found nothing but her skull, feet, and hands. They came back and told Jehu, who said, This is the word of Yahweh which he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. The dogs will eat the flesh of Jezebel in the field of Jezreel. The corpse of Jezebel will be like dung spread on the fields, so that no one will be able to say, This was Jezebel. 2 Kings, chapter 10. There were 70 of Ahab's sons in Samaria. Jehu sent to Samaria, to the authorities of the city, to the elders and to the guardians of Ahab's children. He said, Now, when this letter reaches you, you have your master's sons with you. You also have chariots and horses, a fortified city and weapons. See which of your master's sons is the best and worthiest. Put him on his father's throne and fight for your master's dynasty. They were utterly terrified. We have seen how the 2 kings could not stand up to him, they said. So how could we? Consequently, the master of the palace, the governor of the city, the elders and the guardians sent word to Jehu, We are your servants. We shall do whatever you order us. We shall not proclaim a king. Act as you think best. Jehu then wrote them a second letter. He said, If you are for me, and if you are prepared to accept orders from me, take the heads of the men of your master's family and come to me at Jezreel by this time tomorrow. There were 70 of Ahab's sons being educated there by the leading men of the city. When this letter reached them, they took the king's sons and butchered all 70 of them, put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. The messenger came and told Jehu, They have brought the heads of the king's sons. Leave them in 2 heaps at the entrance to the gate until morning, he replied. When morning came, he went out and standing said to all the people, No guilt attaches to you. I did indeed plot against my master and have killed him. But what about all these? Who struck them? Know then, that nothing will fail to be fulfilled of the prophecy uttered by Yahweh against the house of Ahab. Yahweh has done what he said through his servant Elijah. Jehu then killed every member of the house of Ahab surviving in Jezreel, all his leading men, his close friends, his priests. He did not leave a single one alive. Jehu then set out for Samaria. As he was on his way, at Beth-Eked of the shepherds, he met the brothers of Ahaziah king of Judah. Who are you? He asked. We are Ahaziah's brothers, they replied, and we are on our way to pay our respects to the king's sons and the queen mother's sons. Take them alive, he said. They took them alive, and he slaughtered them at the storage well of Beth-Eked, 42 of them. He did not spare a single one. Leaving there, he came on Jehonadab's son of Rechab, who was on his way to meet him. He greeted him and said, Is your heart true to mine, as my heart is to yours? Jehonadab replied, Yes. If so, Jehu said, Give me your hand. Jehonadab gave him his hand. And Jehu took him up beside him in his chariot. "Come with me," he said, "and witness my zeal for Yahweh," and took him along in his chariot. When he entered Samaria, he killed all the survivors of Ahab's family there. He destroyed it, as Yahweh had told Elijah it would happen. Then Jehu assembled all the people. "Ahab did Baal some small service," he said, "but Jehu will do him a great one. Now call me all the prophets of Baal and all his priests. Not one is to be absent. I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. If anyone is absent, he will forfeit his life." This was a trick on Jehu's part to destroy the devotees of Baal. "Summon a sacred assembly for Baal," he commanded. And they summoned it. Jehu sent messengers throughout Israel, and all the devotees of Baal arrived. Not a man was left who did not attend. They crowded into the temple of Baal until it was full from wall to wall. Jehu then said to the keeper of the wardrobe, "Bring out vestments for all the devotees of Baal." He brought out the vestments for them. Jehu then went into the temple of Baal with Jehonadab son of Rechab and said to Baal's devotees, "Make quite sure that there are no devotees of Yahweh in here with you, but only devotees of Baal." He then proceeded to present sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside, having said, "Whoever lets one of the people go whom I am now putting within your clutches, will pay for it with his life." When he had finished making the burnt offering, he gave the order to the guards and equerries, "Go in, strike them down. Let no one out." The guards and equerries went in, putting everyone to the sword all the way to the sanctuary of Baal's temple. They took the sacred pole out of Baal's temple and burned it. They demolished Baal's image and demolished Baal's temple too, making it into a latrine, which it still is today. Thus Jehu rid Israel of Baal. Even so, Jehu did not give up the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel, the golden calves of Bethel and Dan. Yahweh said to Jehu, "Since you have done well in carrying out what pleases me, and have done everything I required to be done to the house of Ahab, your sons will occupy the throne of Israel down to the 4th generation." Jehu, however, did not faithfully and wholeheartedly follow the law of Yahweh, God of Israel. He did not give up the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. At that time Yahweh began to whittle Israel down, and Hazael defeated the Israelites throughout the territory east of the Jordan, the whole territory of Gilead, of the Gadites, the Reubenites and the Manassahites, from Aroer on the river Arnon, Gilead and Bashan. The rest of the history of Jehu, his entire career, all his prowess, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Then he fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in Samaria. His son Jehoahaz succeeded him. Jehu's reign over Israel in Samaria lasted 28 years. Second Kings, chapter 11. When Athaliah, mother of Ahaziah, learned that her son was dead, she promptly murdered all those of royal stock. But Jehosheba, daughter of King Jehoram and sister of Ahaziah, surreptitiously rescued Jehoash son of Ahaziah from among the princes who were to be murdered, and put him with his nurse in the sleeping quarters. In this way she hid him from Athaliah, and he was not killed. He stayed, hidden with her in the temple of Yahweh for 6 years, while Athaliah governed the country. In the 7th year, Jehoiada sent for the regimental commanders of the Carians and the guards, and had them brought to him in the temple of Yahweh. He made a pact with them, put them on oath, then showed them the king's son. He gave them this order: "This is what you must do. A third of you who come on duty on the Sabbath must mount guard at the royal palace, and your 2 other sections who come off duty on the Sabbath and mount guard at the temple of Yahweh must surround the king, each man with his weapons in his hand. Anyone forcing his way through the ranks is to be killed, and you will escort the king as he leaves and as he comes in." The regimental commanders did everything as Jehoiada the priest had ordered, and each one brought his men, those coming on duty on the Sabbath and those going off duty on the Sabbath, and reported to Jehoiada the priest. The priest then issued the regimental commanders with King David's spears and shields, which were kept in the temple of Yahweh. The guards then took position, each man with his weapons in his hand, from the south corner of the temple to the north corner of the temple, all round the altar and the temple. Then Jehoiada brought the king's son out, crowned him and gave him a copy of the covenant, and they made him king and anointed him, and they clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" On hearing the people shouting, Athaliah joined the people in the temple of Yahweh. When she looked, there stood the king on a dais, as the custom was, with the officers and trumpeters at the king's side, and all the people of the country rejoicing and blowing the trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" Jehoiada the priest then gave the orders to the commanders in charge of the troops, "Take her out under guard and put to death anyone who follows her." For, the priest had already said, she must not be killed inside the temple of Yahweh. They seized her, and when she reached the horses' entry to the palace, she was killed there. Jehoiada made a covenant between Yahweh, the king and the people that they would remain Yahweh's people, and another one between the king and the people. All the people of the country then went to the temple of Baal and demolished it. They smashed its altars and its images and killed Mattan the priest of Baal in front of the altars. The priest made arrangements for the security of the temple of Yahweh. He then took the regimental commanders, the Carians, the guards, and all the people of the country, and they escorted the king down from the temple of Yahweh, entering the palace through the gate of the guards. Jehoash took his seat on the throne of the kings. All the people of the country were delighted. The city, however, made no move, and Athaliah was put to death inside the palace. Second Kings, chapter 12. Jehoash was 7 years old when he came to the throne. Jehoash became king in the 7th year of Jehu, and reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. All his life Jehoash did what Yahweh regards as right, having been instructed by Jehoiada the priest. The high places, however, were not abolished, and the people still offered sacrifices and incense on the high places. Jehoash said to the priests, "All the money from the sacred revenues brought to the temple of Yahweh, the money from personal taxes, and all the money voluntarily offered to the temple, the priests are to receive this individually from people of their acquaintance and will carry out all the repairs to the temple which need to be made." Now in the 23rd year of King Jehoash, the priests had done no repairs to the temple. So King Jehoash summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests. "Why are you not repairing the temple?" he asked. "You are no longer to accept money from people of your acquaintance, but are to hand it over for the temple repairs." The priests agreed to accept no money from the people and no longer to be responsible for repairs to the temple. Jehoiada the priest took a chest, bored a hole in the lid and placed it beside the pillar, to the right of the entry to the temple of Yahweh. In it the priests who guarded the threshold put all the money which was given for the temple of Yahweh. Whenever they saw that there was a great deal of money in the chest, the king's secretary would come, and they would empty it out and reckon the money then in the temple of Yahweh. Once checked, they paid this money over to the masters of works attached to the temple of Yahweh, and these in turn spent it on carpenters and builders working on the temple of Yahweh, on masons and stonecutters, and on buying timber and dressed stone to be used for repairs to the temple of Yahweh. In short, for all the costs of the temple repairs. But no silver basins, knives, sprinkling bowls, trumpets or gold or silver objects were made for the temple of Yahweh out of the money presented, which was all given to the masters of works for repairing the temple of Yahweh. No accounts were kept with the men to whom the money was paid over to be spent on the workmen, since they were honest in their work. Money offered in expiation of an offense or of a sin was not given to the temple of Yahweh. That was for the priests. At that time Hazael king of Aram went to war against Gath, and captured it. He then prepared to attack Jerusalem. Jehoash king of Judah took all the sacred offerings dedicated by his ancestors, the kings of Judah, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram and Ahaziah, with those which he himself had dedicated, and all the gold which was to be found in the treasuries of the temple of Yahweh and of the palace. He sent it all to Hazael king of Aram, who retired from Jerusalem. The rest of the history of Joash, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? His own retainers rebelled and hatched a plot. They murdered Joash in the palace of the Milob. Josachar son of Shimeth and Jehozabad son of Shomer were the retainers who struck the blows from which he died. He was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. His son Amaziah succeeded him. 2 Kings, chapter 13. In the 23rd year of Joash son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz son of Jehu became king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned for 17 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh and copied the sin into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. He did not give it up. This aroused Yahweh's anger against the Israelites, and he delivered them without respite into the power of Hazael king of Aram and of Ben-Hadad son of Hazael. Jehoahaz, however, tried to placate Yahweh, and Yahweh heard him, for he had seen the oppression which the king of Aram was inflicting on Israel. Yahweh gave Israel a savior who freed them from the grip of Aram, and the Israelites lived in their tents as in the past. But they did not give up the sin into which Jeroboam had led Israel. They persisted in it, and even the sacred pole stayed standing in Samaria. Of Jehoahaz's army Yahweh left only 50 horsemen, 10 chariots and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Aram had destroyed them, making them like dust trampled underfoot. The rest of the history of Jehoahaz, his entire career, his prowess, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Then Jehoahaz fell asleep with his ancestors, and was buried in Samaria. His son Joash succeeded him. In the 37th year of Joash king of Judah, Jehoash son of Jehoahaz became king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned for 16 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh. He did not give up the sin into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. He persisted in it. The rest of the history of Joash, his entire career, his prowess, how he waged war on Amaziah king of Judah, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Then Joash fell asleep with his ancestors, and Jeroboam ascended his throne. Joash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. When Elisha had fallen ill of the illness of which he was to die, Joash king of Israel went down to him and shedding tears over him said, "Father, Father, chariot of Israel and its chargers." Elisha said to him, "Bring bow and arrows," and he sent for a bow and arrows. Then Elisha said to the king, "Draw the bow," and he drew it. Elisha put his hands over the hands of the king. Then he said, "Open the window towards the east," and he opened it. Then Elisha said, "Shoot," and he shot. Elisha said, "Arrow of victory over Aram. You will defeat Aram at Aphek completely." Elisha said, "Take the arrows," and he took them. Then he said to the king, "Strike the ground," and he struck it 3 times, then stopped. At this the man of God grew angry with him. "You should have struck 6 times," he said, "and you would have beaten Aram completely. Now you will beat Aram only 3 times." Elisha died and was buried. Bands of Moabites were making incursions into the country every year. Some people happened to be carrying a man out for burial. At the sight of one of these bands, they flung the man into the tomb of Elisha and made off. The man had no sooner touched the bones of Elisha than he came to life and stood up on his feet. Hazael king of Aram had oppressed the Israelites throughout the lifetime of Jehoahaz, but Yahweh was kind and took pity on them. Because of the covenant which he had made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he relented towards them. He had no wish to destroy them. He did not cast them out of his presence. Hazael king of Aram died, and his son Ben-Hadad succeeded him. From Ben-Hadad son of Hazael, Jehoash son of Jehoahaz recaptured the towns which Hazael had seized from his father Jehoahaz by force of arms. Joash defeated him 3 times and recovered the Israelite towns. Second Kings, chapter 14. In the 2nd year of Joash son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel, Amaziah son of Joash became king of Judah. He was 25 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem.
His mother's name was Jehoadan of Jerusalem.
He did what Yahweh regards as right, though not like his ancestor David. He imitated his father Joash in all respects. The high places, however, were not abolished, and the people still offered sacrifices and incense on the high places. Once the kingdom was firmly under his control, he killed those of his retainers who had murdered the king his father. But he did not put the murderer's sons to death, in accordance with what is written in the book of Moses, where Yahweh has commanded, "Parents may not be put to death for their children, nor children for parents, but each must be put to death for his own crime." It was he who slaughtered the Edomites in the Valley of Salt, 10,000 of them, and captured the rock. He gave it the name Joktheel, which it bears to the present day. Amaziah then sent messengers to Jehoash son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel, saying, "Come and make a trial of strength." Jehoash king of Israel sent back word to Amaziah king of Judah. The thistle of Lebanon sent a message to the cedar of Lebanon, saying, "Give my son your daughter in marriage." But a wild animal of the Lebanon ran over the thistle and squashed it. "You have conquered Edom and now aspire to even greater glory. Stay where you belong. Why provoke disaster, to your own and Judah's ruin?" But Amaziah would not listen. So Jehoash king of Israel marched to the attack. And at Beth-Shemesh, which belongs to Judah, he and Amaziah king of Judah made their trial of strength. Judah was defeated by Israel, and everyone fled to his tent. The king of Judah, Amaziah son of Jehoash, son of Ahaziah, was taken prisoner at Beth-Shemesh by Jehoash king of Israel, who led him off to Jerusalem, where he demolished 400 cubits of the city wall between the Ephraim gate and the corner gate, all the gold and silver, and all the vessels to be found in the temple of Yahweh and in the palace treasury, and hostages besides. He then took back with him to Samaria. The rest of the history of Jehoash, his entire career, his prowess, how he waged war on Amaziah king of Judah, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Then Joash fell asleep with his ancestors, and was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. His son Jeroboam succeeded him. Amaziah son of Joash, king of Judah, lived for 15 years after the death of Jehoash son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel. The rest of the history of Amaziah, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? A plot having been hatched against him in Jerusalem, he fled to Lachish, but he was followed to Lachish where he was murdered. He was then transported by horse and buried in Jerusalem with his ancestors in the city of David. All the people of Judah then chose Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in succession to his father Amaziah. It was he who rebuilt Elath, recovering it for Judah, after the king had fallen asleep with his ancestors. In the 15th year of Amaziah son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam son of Joash became king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned for 41 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh and did not give up any of the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. It was he who recovered the territory of Israel from the pass of Hamath to the sea of the Arabah, in accordance with the word which Yahweh, God of Israel, had spoken through his servant Jonah son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher. For Yahweh had seen how very bitter the affliction of Israel was, with no one, either fettered or free, to come to Israel's help. But Yahweh had resolved not to blot out the name of Israel under heaven. He rescued them by means of Jeroboam son of Joash. The rest of the history of Jeroboam, his entire career, his prowess, what wars he waged, how he brought Damascus and Hamath back to their allegiance to Judah and Israel, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Then Jeroboam fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. His son Zechariah succeeded him. 2 Kings, chapter 15. In the 17th year of Jeroboam king of Israel, Uzziah son of Amaziah became king of Judah. He was 16 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. He did what Yahweh regards as right, just as his father Amaziah had done. The high places, however, were not abolished, and the people still offered sacrifices and incense on the high places. But Yahweh struck the king, and he was afflicted with a virulent skin disease till his dying day. He lived confined to his room, while Jotham the king's son, who was master of the palace, governed the country. The rest of the history of Uzziah, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Then Uzziah fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. His son Jotham then succeeded him. In the 38th year of Uzziah king of Judah, Zechariah son of Jeroboam became king of Israel in Samaria for 6 months. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, as his fathers had done. He did not give up the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. Shallum son of Jabesh plotted against him, murdered him at Ibleam, and succeeded him. The rest of the history of Zechariah is recorded in the book of Annals of the Kings of Israel. This was the word which Yahweh had spoken to Jehu: "Your sons will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation." And so it turned out. Shallum son of Jabesh became king in the 39th year of Uzziah king of Judah and reigned for 1 month in Samaria. Then Menahem son of Gadi marched from Tirzah, entered Samaria, murdered Shallum son of Jabesh there and succeeded him. The rest of the history of Shallum, and the plot he hatched, is recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Israel. Menahem then sacked Tappuah, killing all who were in it, and its territory from Tirzah onwards, because it had not opened its gates to him. He sacked the town and disemboweled all the pregnant women. In the 39th year of Uzziah king of Judah, Menahem son of Gadi became king of Israel. He reigned for 10 years in Samaria. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh. He did not give up the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. In his days Pul king of Assyria invaded the country. Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver in return for his support in strengthening his hold on the royal power. Menahem levied this sum from Israel, from all the men of rank, at the rate of 50 shekels a head, to be given to the king of Assyria, who then withdrew and did not stay in the country. The rest of the history of Menahem, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Israel? Then Menahem fell asleep with his ancestors. His son Pekahiah succeeded him. In the 50th year of Uzziah king of Judah, Pekahiah son of Menahem became king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned for 2 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh. He did not give up the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. Pekah son of Remaliah, his equerry, plotted against him and assassinated him in the palace keeps. He had 50 Gileadites with him. He killed the king and succeeded him. The rest of the history of Pekahiah, his entire career, is recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Israel. In the 52nd year of Uzziah king of Judah, Pekah son of Remaliah became king of Israel in Samaria. He reigned for 20 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh. He did not give up the sins into which Jeroboam son of Nebat had led Israel. In the days of Pekah king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria came and captured Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, Genoa, Kadesh, Hazor, Gilead and Galilee, the whole territory of Naphtali, and deported the population to Assyria. Hosea son of Elah hatched a plot against Pekah son of Remaliah. He murdered the king and succeeded him. The rest of the history of Pekah, his entire career, is recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Israel. In the 2nd year of Pekah son of Remaliah, king of Israel, Jotham son of Uzziah became king of Judah. He was 25 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha daughter of Zadok. He did what Yahweh regards as right, just as his father Uzziah had done. The high places, however, were not abolished, and the people still offered sacrifices and incense on the high places. It was he who built the upper gate of the temple of Yahweh. The rest of the history of Jotham, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Judah? At that time Yahweh began sending Rezon king of Aram and Pekah son of Remaliah against Judah. Then Jotham fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David, his ancestor. His son Ahaz succeeded him. Second Kings, chapter 16. In the 17th year of Pekah son of Remaliah, Ahaz son of Jotham became king of Judah. Ahaz was 20 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what Yahweh his God regards as right, as his ancestor David had done. He followed the example of the kings of Israel, even causing his son to pass through the fire of sacrifice, also copying the disgusting practices of the nations whom Yahweh had dispossessed for the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and incense on the high places, on the hills and under every luxuriant tree. Then it was that Rezon king of Aram and Pekah son of Remaliah, king of Israel, launched their campaign against Jerusalem. They besieged it but could not reduce it. At that time, the king of Edom recovered Elath for Edom. He drove the Judeans out of Elath, and the Edomites occupied it and have been there ever since. Ahaz then sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria to say, I am your servant and your son. Come and rescue me from the king of Aram and the king of Israel who are making war on me. And Ahaz took what silver and gold was to be found in the temple of Yahweh and in the palace treasury, and sent this as a present to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria granted his request and, marching on Damascus, captured it. He deported its population to Kir and put Rezon to death. When King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser king of Assyria, he saw the altar which was in Damascus. King Ahaz then sent a picture and model of the altar, with details of its construction, to Uriah the priest. Uriah the priest constructed the altar. All the instructions sent by King Ahaz from Damascus were carried out by Uriah the priest before King Ahaz returned from Damascus. When the king arrived from Damascus, he inspected the altar, he approached it and ascended it, and on the altar he made his burnt offering and his oblation. He poured out his libation and sprinkled the blood of his communion sacrifices. The altar which used to stand before Yahweh he removed from the front of the temple, where it had stood between the new altar and the temple of Yahweh, and placed it at the north side of the new altar. King Ahaz gave this order to Uriah the priest, In future you will present the morning burnt offering, the evening oblation, the king's burnt offering and oblation, the burnt offering, the oblation and the libations of all the people of the country on the large altar. On it you will pour out all the blood of the burnt offerings and sacrifices. As regards the bronze altar, I shall see to that. Uriah the priest did everything that King Ahaz had ordered. King Ahaz broke up the wheeled stands, removed the crosspieces and the basins from them, and took the bronze sea off the oxen supporting it, and rested it on the stone pavement. And from the temple of Yahweh, in deference to the king of Assyria, he removed the dais for the throne which had been built inside, and the royal entrance on the outside. The rest of the history of Ahaz, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Then Ahaz fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. His son Hezekiah succeeded him. Second Kings, chapter 17. In the 12th year of Ahaz king of Judah, Hosea son of Elah became king of Israel in Samaria, and reigned for 9 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, though not like the preceding kings of Israel. Shalmaneser king of Assyria made war on Hosea, who submitted to him and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hosea was playing a double game with him. He had sent messengers to Sais, to the king of Egypt, and had not, as in previous years, handed over the tribute to the king of Assyria. For this the king of Assyria imprisoned him in chains. The king of Assyria invaded the whole country and, coming to Samaria, laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala on the Habor, a river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. This happened because the Israelites had sinned against Yahweh their God, who had brought them out of Egypt, out of the grip of Pharaoh king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods. They followed the practices of the nations which Yahweh had dispossessed for them. The Israelites spoke slightingly of Yahweh their God. They built themselves high places wherever they lived, from watchtower to fortified town. They set up pillars and sacred poles for themselves on every high hill and under every luxuriant tree. They sacrificed on all the high places like the nations which Yahweh had expelled for them, and did wicked things there, provoking Yahweh's anger. They served idols, although Yahweh had told them, "This you must not do." And yet through all the prophets and the seers, Yahweh had given Israel and Judah this warning: "Turn from your wicked ways and keep my commandments and my laws in accordance with the entire law which I laid down for your fathers and delivered to them through my servants the prophets." But they would not listen. They were as stubborn as their ancestors, who had no faith in Yahweh their God. They despised his laws and the covenant which he had made with their ancestors and the warnings which he had given them. Pursuing futility, they themselves became futile through copying the nations round them, although Yahweh had ordered them not to act as they did. They rejected all the commandments of Yahweh their God and cast themselves metal idols, 2 calves. They made themselves sacred poles. They worshipped the whole array of heaven, and they served Baal. They caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire of sacrifice. Also they practiced divination and sorcery. They sold themselves to doing what displeases Yahweh, provoking his anger. Because of which, Yahweh became enraged with Israel and thrust them away from him. The tribe of Judah was the only one left. Judah did not keep the commandments of Yahweh their God either, but copied the practices which Israel had introduced. Yahweh rejected the whole race of Israel. He brought them low, delivering them into the hands of marauders, until at length he thrust them away from him. And indeed he had torn Israel away from the house of David, and they had made Jeroboam son of Nebat king. Jeroboam had drawn Israel away from Yahweh and led them into a great sin. The Israelites copied the sin which Jeroboam had committed. They did not give it up, until at length Yahweh thrust Israel away from him, as he had foretold through all his servants the prophets. He deported the Israelites from their own country to Assyria, where they have been ever since. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. These took possession of Samaria and lived in its towns. When they first came to live there, they did not worship Yahweh. Hence, Yahweh set lions on them, which killed a number of them. Consequently, the king of Assyria was informed as follows: "The nations whom you deported and settled in the towns of Samaria do not know how to worship the local God, and he has set lions on them. And now these are killing them because they do not know how to worship the local God." So the king of Assyria gave this order: "Send back one of the priests whom I deported from there. Let him go and live there and teach them how to worship the local God." Accordingly, one of the priests who had been deported from Samaria came to live in Bethel. He taught them how to worship Yahweh. Each nationality made gods of its own and put them in the shrines on the high places built by the Samaritans. Each nationality did this in the towns where it lived. The people from Babylon had made a Sukkos Banath, the people from Cutha a Nergal, the people from Hamath and Ashima, the Avites a Nibaz and a Tartak, while the Sepharvites caused their children to pass through the fire of sacrifice to Adramelech and Anamelech, gods of Sepharvaim. They worshipped Yahweh as well, and they appointed priests out of their own number for the high places, and these officiated in the shrines on the high places. They worshipped Yahweh and served their own gods at the same time, with the rites of the countries from which they had been deported. They still follow their old rites even now. They did not worship Yahweh and did not conform to his statutes or ritual, or the law or the commandments, which Yahweh had laid down for the sons of Jacob, to whom he gave the name Israel. Yahweh had made a covenant with them and had given them this command: "You are not to worship alien gods. You are not to bow down to them or serve them or offer them sacrifices. You are to bow down and offer sacrifice only to Yahweh, who brought you out of Egypt with great power and outstretched arm. You are to observe the statutes and ritual, the law and the commandments which he has given you in writing, and to which you are always to conform. You are not to worship alien gods. Do not forget the covenant which I have made with you, and do not venerate alien gods.
But venerate Yahweh your God, and he will deliver you from the clutches of all your enemies.
But they would not listen and still followed their old rites. These nationalities then worshipped Yahweh and served their idols as well, as did their children. And their children's children still behave today as their ancestors behaved in the past. Second Kings, chapter 18. In the 3rd year of Hosea son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah son of Ahaz became king of Judah. He was 25 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem.
His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah.
He did what Yahweh regards as right, just as his ancestor David had done. He abolished the high places, broke the pillars, cut down the sacred poles and smashed the bronze serpent which Moses had made. For up to that time the Israelites had offered sacrifices to it. It was called Nehushtan. He put his trust in Yahweh, God of Israel. No king of Judah after him could be compared with him, nor any of those before him. He was devoted to Yahweh, never turning from him, but keeping the commandments which Yahweh had laid down for Moses. And so Yahweh was with him, and he was successful in all that he undertook. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and refused to serve him. He beat the Philistines back to Gaza, laying their territory waste from watchtower to fortified town. In the 4th year of Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hosea son of Elah, king of Israel, Shalmaneser king of Assyria marched on Samaria and laid siege to it. He captured it after 3 years. Samaria fell in the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of Hosea king of Israel. The king of Assyria deported the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Hala on the Habor, a river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. This happened because they had not obeyed the voice of Yahweh their God and had broken his covenant, everything that Moses servant of Yahweh had laid down. They neither listened to it nor put it into practice. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib king of Assyria advanced on all the fortified towns of Judah and captured them. Then Hezekiah king of Judah sent this message to the king of Assyria at Lachish: I have been at fault. Call off the attack, and I will submit to whatever you impose on me. The king of Assyria exacted 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold from Hezekiah king of Judah, and Hezekiah gave him all the silver in the temple of Yahweh and in the palace treasury. At which time Hezekiah stripped the facing from the leaves and jambs of the doors of the temple of Yahweh, which an earlier king of Judah had put on, and gave it to the king of Assyria. From Lachish the king of Assyria sent the cupbearer-in-chief with a large force to King Hezekiah in Jerusalem. He marched on Jerusalem and, on his arrival, took up position near the conduit of the upper pool which is on the road to the fuller's field. He summoned the king. The master of the palace, Eliakim son of Hilkiah, Shebna the secretary, and the herald Joah son of Asaph went out to him. The cupbearer-in-chief said to them, Say to Hezekiah, the great king, the king of Assyria, says this: What makes you so confident? Do you think empty words are as good as strategy and military strength? Who are you relying on to dare to rebel against me? There you are, relying on that broken reed Egypt, which pricks and pierces the hand of whoever leans on it. That is what Pharaoh king of Egypt is like to all who rely on him. You may say to me, We rely on Yahweh our God. But have his high places and altars not been suppressed by Hezekiah, who told Judah and Jerusalem, Here in Jerusalem is the altar before which you must worship? Very well, then, make a wager with my lord the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you can find horsemen to ride them. How could you repel a single one of the least of my master's soldiers? And yet you have relied on Egypt for chariots and horsemen. And lastly, have I marched on this place to lay it waste without warrant from Yahweh? Yahweh himself said to me, March on this country and lay it waste. Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah said to the cupbearer-in-chief, Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the Judean language within earshot of the people on the ramparts." But the cupbearer-in-chief said, "Do you think my lord sent me here to say these things to your master or to you? On the contrary, it was to the people sitting on the ramparts who, like you, are doomed to eat their own dung and drink their own urine." The cupbearer-in-chief then drew himself up and shouted loudly in the Judean language, "Listen to the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. The king says this: Do not let Hezekiah delude you. He will be powerless to save you from my clutches. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to rely on Yahweh by saying, 'Yahweh is sure to save us.' This city will not fall into the king of Assyria's clutches. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for the king of Assyria says this: 'Make peace with me, surrender to me, and every one of you will be free to eat the fruit of his own vine and of his own fig tree, and to drink the water of his own storage well until I come and take you away to a country like your own, a land of corn and good wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of oil and honey, and so you will survive and not die.' Do not listen to Hezekiah. He is deluding you when he says, 'Yahweh will save us.' Has any god of any nation been able to save his country from the king of Assyria's clutches? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim and Hena and Iva? Where are the local gods of Samaria? Did they save Samaria from my clutches? Of all the local gods, which ones have saved their countries from my clutches? For Yahweh to be able to save Jerusalem from my clutches?" The people, however, kept quiet and said nothing in reply, since the king had given the order, "You are not to answer him." The master of the palace, Eliakim son of Hilkiah, Shebna the secretary, and the herald Joah son of Asaph, with their clothes torn, went to Hezekiah and reported what the cupbearer-in-chief had said. 2 Kings, chapter 19. On hearing this, King Hezekiah tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and went to the temple of Yahweh. He sent Eliakim master of the palace, Shebna the secretary, and the elders of the priests, wearing sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah son of Amoz. They said to him, "This is what Hezekiah says: Today is a day of suffering, of punishment, of disgrace. Children come to birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. May Yahweh your God hear the words of the cupbearer-in-chief, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to insult the living God, and may Yahweh your God punish the words he has heard. Offer your prayer for the remnant still remaining." King Hezekiah's ministers went to Isaiah, and Isaiah said to them, "Say to your master, Yahweh says this: Do not be afraid of the words which you have heard or the blasphemies which the king of Assyria's minions have uttered against me. Look, I am going to put a spirit in him, and, on the strength of a rumor, he will go back to his own country, and in that country I shall make him fall by the sword." The cupbearer turned about and rejoined the king of Assyria, who was then attacking Libnah, as the cupbearer had learned that the king had already left Lachish on hearing that Tirhakah king of Cush was on his way to attack him. Sennacherib again sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, "Tell Hezekiah king of Judah this: Do not let your God on whom you are relying deceive you with a promise. Jerusalem will not fall into the king of Assyria's clutches. You have learnt by now what the kings of Assyria have done to all the other countries, devoting them to destruction. Are you likely to be saved? Did the gods of the nations whom my ancestors devastated save them? Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the Edenites who were in Tel Basar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of Lair, of Sepharvaim, of Hena, of Iva?" Hezekiah took the letter from the messenger's hands and read it. He then went up to the temple of Yahweh and spread it out before Yahweh. Hezekiah said this prayer in the presence of Yahweh: "Yahweh Sabaoth, God of Israel, enthroned on the winged creatures, you alone are God of all the kingdoms of the world. You made heaven and earth. Give ear, Yahweh, and listen. Open your eyes, Yahweh, and see. Hear the words of Sennacherib, who has sent to insult the living God. It is true, Yahweh, that the kings of Assyria have destroyed the nations. They have thrown their gods on the fire. For these were not gods but human artifacts,
wood and stone, and hence they have destroyed them. But now, Yahweh our God, save us from his clutches, I beg you, and let all the kingdoms of the world know that you alone are God, Yahweh." Isaiah son of Amoz then sent the following message to Hezekiah. "Yahweh, God of Israel, says this, I have heard the prayer which you have addressed to me about Sennacherib king of Assyria. Here is the pronouncement which Yahweh has made about him. She despises you, she scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She tosses her head at you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you insulted? Whom have you blasphemed? Against whom raised your voice and lifted your haughty eyes? Against the Holy One of Israel. Through your envoys you have insulted the Lord, thinking, with my many chariots I have climbed the mountain tops, the utmost peaks of Lebanon. I have felled its mighty cedars, its finest cypresses, have reached its furthest recesses, its forest garden. Yes, I have dug and drunk of foreign waters. Under the soles of my feet I have dried up all Egypt's rivers. Do you hear? Long ago I prepared this, from days of old I actually planned it, now I carry it out. You were to lay walled cities in heaps of ruins. That was why their inhabitants, feeble of hand, were dismayed and discomfited, were weak as grass, were frail as plants, were like grass of housetop and meadow under the east wind. But whether you stand up or you sit down, whether you go out or you come in, I know it, because you have raved against me, and your arrogance has reached my ears. I shall put a hook through your nostrils and a muzzle on your lips, and make you return by the road by which you came. And this will be the sign for you. This year will be eaten the self-sown grain, next year what sprouts in the fallow. But in the third year sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat their fruit. The surviving remnant of the house of Judah will bring forth new roots below and fruits above. For a remnant will issue from Jerusalem, and survivors from Mount Zion. Yahweh Sabaoth's jealous love will accomplish this. This then is what Yahweh says about the king of Assyria. He will not enter this city, will shoot no arrow at it, confront it with no shield, throw up no earthwork against it. By the road by which he came, by that he will return. He will not enter this city, declares Yahweh. I shall protect this city and save it for my sake and my servant David's sake. That same night the angel of Yahweh went out and struck down 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. In the early morning when it was time to get up, there they lay, so many corpses. Sennacherib struck camp and left. He returned home and stayed in Nineveh. One day when he was worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons Adramelech and Sharezer struck him down with a sword and escaped into the territory of Ararat. His son Esarhaddon succeeded him. 2 Kings, chapter 20. About then Hezekiah fell ill and was at the point of death. The prophet Isaiah son of Amoz came and said to him, Yahweh says this, Put your affairs in order, for you are going to die, you will not live. Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and addressed this prayer to Yahweh. Yahweh, remember, I beg you, that I have behaved faithfully and with sincerity of heart in your presence and done what you regard as right. And Hezekiah shed many tears. Isaiah had not left the middle court, before the word of Yahweh came to him. Go back and say to Hezekiah, Prince of my people, Yahweh, the God of your ancestor David, says this, I have heard your prayer and seen your tears. I shall cure you. In 3 days' time you will go up to the temple of Yahweh. I shall add 15 years to your life. I shall save you and this city from the king of Assyria's clutches and defend this city for my sake and my servant David's sake. Bring a fig poultice, Isaiah said. They brought one, applied it to the ulcer, and the king recovered. Hezekiah said to Isaiah, What is the sign to tell me that Yahweh will cure me and that I shall be going up to the temple of Yahweh in 3 days' time? Here, Isaiah replied, is the sign from Yahweh that he will do what he has said. Would you like the shadow to go forward 10 steps, or to go back 10 steps? It is easy for the shadow to lengthen 10 steps, Hezekiah replied. No, I would rather the shadow went back 10 steps.
The prophet Isaiah then called on Yahweh, who made the shadow cast by the declining sun on the steps to Ahaz's roof room. Go back 10 steps. At that time the king of Babylon, Merodach-Baladan son of Baladan, sent letters and a gift to Hezekiah, for he had heard of his illness and his recovery. Hezekiah was delighted at this and showed the ambassadors his entire treasury, the silver, gold, spices, precious oil, his armory too, and everything to be seen in his storehouses. There was nothing in his palace or in his whole domain that Hezekiah did not show them. The prophet Isaiah then came to King Hezekiah and asked him, "What have these men said, and where have they come from?" Hezekiah answered, "They have come from a distant country, from Babylon." Isaiah said, "What have they seen in your palace?" "They have seen everything in my palace," Hezekiah answered. "There is nothing in my storehouses that I have not shown them." Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Listen to the word of Yahweh. The days are coming when everything in your palace, everything that your ancestors have amassed until now, will be carried off to Babylon. Not a thing will be left, Yahweh says. Sons sprung from you, sons fathered by you, will be abducted to be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "This word of Yahweh that you announce is reassuring," for he was thinking, "And why not? So long as there is peace and security during my lifetime." The rest of the history of Hezekiah, all his prowess, how he constructed the pool and the conduit to bring water into the city, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Then Hezekiah fell asleep with his ancestors. His son Manasseh succeeded him. 2 Kings, chapter 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, copying the disgusting practices of the nations whom Yahweh had dispossessed for the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places which his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He set up altars to Baal and made a sacred pole as Ahab king of Israel had done. He worshipped the whole array of heaven and served it. He built altars in the temple of Yahweh, of which Yahweh had said, "Jerusalem is where I shall put my name." He built altars to the whole array of heaven in the 2 courts of the temple of Yahweh. He caused his son to pass through the fire of sacrifice. He also practiced soothsaying and divination, and set up mediums and spirit guides. He did very many more things displeasing to Yahweh, thus provoking his anger. He had an image of Asherah carved and placed it inside the temple of which Yahweh had said to David and his son Solomon, "In this temple and in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I shall put my name forever. Nor shall I ever again set Israel's footsteps wandering outside the country which I gave to their ancestors, provided they are careful to observe all I have commanded them as laid down in the whole law which my servant Moses prescribed for them." But they would not listen, and Manasseh misled them into doing worse things than the nations whom Yahweh had destroyed for the Israelites. Then Yahweh spoke through his servants the prophets as follows: "Since Manasseh king of Judah has done these shameful deeds, doing more wicked deeds than anything which the Amorites did before him, and has led Judah too into sin with his idols, Yahweh, God of Israel, says this: Look, I shall bring such disaster on Jerusalem and Judah as will make the ears of all who hear of it tingle. Over Jerusalem I shall stretch the same measuring line as over Samaria, the same plumb rule as for the house of Ahab. I shall scour Jerusalem as someone scours a dish and, having scoured it, turns it upside down. I shall cast away the remnant of my heritage, delivering them into the clutches of their enemies and making them the prey and booty of all their enemies, because they have done what is displeasing to me and have provoked my anger from the day their ancestors came out of Egypt until now." Manasseh shed innocent blood too, in such great quantity that he flooded Jerusalem from one end to the other, besides the sins into which he led Judah by doing what is displeasing to Yahweh. The rest of the history of Manasseh, his entire career, the sins he committed, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Then Manasseh fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in the garden of his palace, the garden of Uzzah. His son Amon succeeded him.
Amon was 22 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 2 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Meshullemeth, daughter of Haruz, of Jotbah. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, as Manasseh his father had done. In every respect he followed the example of his father, serving the idols which his father had served, and worshipping them. He abandoned Yahweh, God of his ancestors. He did not follow the way of Yahweh. Amon's retinue plotted against the king and killed him in his own palace. The people of the country, however, slaughtered all those who had plotted against King Amon and proclaimed his son Josiah as his successor. The rest of the history of Amon, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? He was buried in his father's tomb in the garden of Uzzah. His son Josiah succeeded him. 2 Kings, chapter 22. Josiah was 8 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adaiah, of Bosketh. He did what Yahweh regards as right, and in every respect followed the example of his ancestor David, not deviating from it to right or left. In the 18th year of King Josiah, the king sent the secretary Shaphan, son of Azaliah, son of Meshullam, to the temple of Yahweh. "Go to Hilkiah the high priest," he told him, "and tell him to melt down the silver contributed to the temple of Yahweh and collected by the guardians of the threshold from the people. He is to hand it over to the masters of works attached to the temple of Yahweh, for them to pay it over to men working on the temple of Yahweh, to repair the damaged parts of the temple, to the carpenters, builders, and masons, and for buying timber and dressed stone for the temple repairs. The latter were not required to render account of the money handed over to them, since they were conscientious in their work." The high priest Hilkiah said to Shaphan the secretary, "I have found the book of the law in the temple of Yahweh." And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, who read it. Shaphan the secretary went to the king, reporting furthermore to him as follows: "Your servants have melted down the silver which was in the temple and have handed it over to the masters of works attached to the temple of Yahweh." Then Shaphan the secretary informed the king, "The priest Hilkiah has given me a book." And Shaphan read it aloud in the king's presence. On hearing the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes. Then the king gave the following order to the priest Hilkiah, Ahikam son of Shaphan, Achbor son of Micaiah, Shaphan the secretary, and Asaiah the king's minister: "Go and consult Yahweh on behalf of me and the people about the words of the book that has been discovered. For Yahweh's furious wrath has been kindled against us because our ancestors disobeyed the word of Yahweh by not doing what this book says they ought to have done." The priest Hilkiah, Ahikam, Achbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went to the prophetess Huldah, wife of Shallum son of Tikvah, son of Harhas, the keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the new town. They put the matter to her, and she replied, "Yahweh, God of Israel, says this: to the man who sent you to me say this: Yahweh says this: I am going to bring disaster on this place and the people who live in it." All the words of the book read by the king of Judah. "Because they have abandoned me and sacrificed to other gods, so as to provoke my anger by their every action, my wrath is kindled against this place, and nothing can stop it. As for the king of Judah who sent you to consult Yahweh, say this to him, as regards the words you have heard. But since your heart has been touched and you have humbled yourself before Yahweh on hearing what I have decreed against this place and the people who live in it, how they will become an object of horror and cursing, and have torn your clothes and wept before me, I too have heard, Yahweh says this. So look, when I gather you to your ancestors, you will be gathered into your grave in peace. You will not live to see the great disaster that I am going to bring on this place." They took this answer to the king. Second Kings, chapter 23. The king then had all the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem summoned to him. And the king went up to the temple of Yahweh with all the people of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, priests, prophets, and the whole populace, high and low. In their hearing he read out the entire contents of the book of the covenant discovered in the temple of Yahweh. The king then, standing on the dais, bound himself by the covenant before Yahweh, to follow Yahweh, to keep his commandments, decrees and laws with all his heart and soul, and to carry out the terms of the covenant as written in this book. All the people the king ordered Hilkiah with the priest next in rank and the guardians of the threshold to remove all the cult objects which had been made for Baal, Asherah, and the whole array of heaven. He burnt them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron and had the ashes taken to Bethel. He exterminated the spurious priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed and who offered sacrifice on the high places, in the towns of Judah and the neighborhood of Jerusalem. Also those who offered sacrifice to Baal, to the sun, the moon, the constellations and the whole array of heaven. And from the temple of Yahweh he took the sacred pole outside Jerusalem to the Kidron Valley, and in the Kidron Valley he burnt it, reducing it to ashes and throwing its ashes on the common burial ground. He pulled down the house of the sacred male prostitutes which was in the temple of Yahweh and where the women wove veils for Asherah. He brought all the priests in from the towns of Judah, and from Geba to Beersheba he rendered unsanctified the high places where these priests had offered sacrifice. He pulled down the high place of the gates, which stood at the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, to the left of the entry to the city. The priests of the high places, however, did not officiate at the altar of Yahweh in Jerusalem, although they did share the unleavened bread of their brother priests. He rendered unsanctified Tophet in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so that no one could pass his son or daughter through the fire of sacrifice to Molech. He destroyed the horses which the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance to the temple of Yahweh, near the apartment of Nathan-Melech the official, in the precincts, and he burned the solar chariot. The king pulled down altars which the kings of Judah had built on the roof, and those which Manasseh had built in the two courts of the temple of Yahweh, and broke them to pieces on the spot, throwing their rubble into the Kidron Valley. The king rendered unsanctified the high places facing Jerusalem, to the south of the Mount of Olives, which Solomon king of Israel had built for Astarte the Sidonian abomination, for Chemosh the Moabite abomination, and for Milcom the Ammonite abomination. He also smashed the sacred pillars, cut down the sacred poles, and covered with human bones the places where they had stood. As for the altar which was at Bethel, the high place built by Jeroboam son of Nebat who had led Israel into sin, he demolished this altar and this high place as well, in the same way, breaking up its stones and reducing them to powder. The sacred pole he burned. On looking round, Josiah saw the tombs there on the hillside. He had the bones fetched from the tombs and burned them on the altar. This he rendered unsanctified, in accordance with the word of Yahweh which the man of God had proclaimed when Jeroboam was standing by the altar at the time of the feast. On looking round, Josiah caught sight of the tomb of the man of God who had foretold these things. "What is that monument I see?" he asked. The townspeople replied, "It is the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and foretold what you have done to the altar." "Let him rest," the king said, "and let no one disturb his bones." So they left his bones untouched, with the bones of the prophet who came from Samaria. Josiah also destroyed all the shrines on the high places which were in the towns of Samaria and which the kings of Israel had built to provoke Yahweh's anger. He treated these places exactly as he had treated the one at Bethel. All the priests of the high places who were there he slaughtered on the altars, and on those altars burned human bones. Then he returned to Jerusalem. The king gave this order to the whole people: "Celebrate a Passover to Yahweh your God, as prescribed in this book of the covenant." No Passover like this had ever been celebrated since the days when the judges ruled Israel, nor throughout the entire period of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. The 18th year of King Josiah was the only time when such a Passover was celebrated in Yahweh's honor in Jerusalem. What is more, the spirit guides and mediums, the household gods and idols, and all the abominations to be seen in the country of Judah and in Jerusalem, were swept away by Josiah to give effect to the words of the law written in the book found by the priest Hilkiah in the temple of Yahweh. No king before him turned to Yahweh as he did, with all his heart, all his soul, all his strength, in perfect loyalty to the law of Moses. Nor did any king like him arise again. Yet Yahweh did not renounce the heat of his great anger which had been aroused against Judah by all the provocations which Manasseh had caused him. Yahweh said,
I shall thrust Judah away from me too, as I have already thrust Israel. I shall cast off Jerusalem, this city which I have chosen, and the temple of which I have said, My name shall be there. The rest of the history of Josiah, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? In his times, Pharaoh Necho king of Egypt was advancing to meet the king of Assyria at the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went to intercept him. But Necho killed him at Megiddo in the first encounter. His retainers carried his body from Megiddo by chariot. They brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. The people of the country then took Jehoahaz son of Josiah and anointed him, proclaiming him king in succession to his father. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal daughter of Jeremiah, of Libnah. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, just as his ancestors had done. Pharaoh Necho put him in chains at Riblah in Hamath, to prevent his reigning any longer in Jerusalem, and imposed a levy of 100 talents of silver and 10 talents of gold on the country. Pharaoh Necho then made Eliakim son of Josiah king in succession to Josiah his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. Carrying off Jehoahaz, he took him to Egypt, where he died. Jehoiakim paid over the silver and gold to Pharaoh, but first had to tax the people of the country before he could raise the sum which Pharaoh demanded. He levied the silver and gold to be paid over to Pharaoh Necho from each according to his means. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebidah daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, just as his ancestors had done. Second Kings, chapter 24. In his times, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon invaded, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years, but then rebelled against him a second time. So he sent armed bands of Chaldeans, Arameans, Moabites, and Ammonites against him. He sent these against Judah to destroy it, in accordance with the word which Yahweh had spoken through his servants the prophets. It was entirely due to Yahweh's anger that this happened to Judah. He had resolved to thrust them away from him because of Manasseh's sins and all that he had done, and also because of the innocent blood which he had shed, flooding Jerusalem with innocent blood. Yahweh would not forgive. The rest of the history of Jehoiakim, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Then Jehoiakim fell asleep with his ancestors. His son Jehoiakim succeeded him. The king of Egypt did not leave his own country again, because the king of Babylon had conquered everywhere belonging to the king of Egypt, from the torrent of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Nehushta daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, just as his father had done. At that time the troops of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon advanced on Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon advanced on the city, and his generals laid siege to it. Jehoiakim king of Judah, he, his mother, his retinue, his nobles and his officials, then surrendered to the king of Babylon, and the king of Babylon took them prisoner in the 8th year of his reign. The latter carried off all the treasures of the temple of Yahweh and the treasures of the palace, and broke up all the golden furnishings which Solomon king of Israel had made for the sanctuary of Yahweh, as Yahweh had foretold. He carried all Jerusalem off into exile, all the nobles and all the notables. 10,000 of these were exiled, with all the blacksmiths and metalworkers. Only the poorest people in the country were left behind. He deported Jehoiakim to Babylon, as also the king's mother, his officials and the nobility of the country. He made them all leave Jerusalem for exile in Babylon. All the men of distinction, 7,000 of them, the blacksmiths and metalworkers, 1,000 of them, all the men capable of bearing arms, were led off into exile in Babylon by the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon deposed Jehoiakim in favor of his paternal uncle Mattaniah, whose name he changed to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he came to the throne,
and he reigned for 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah, of Libnah. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, just as Jehoiakim had done. It was entirely due to Yahweh's anger that this happened to Jerusalem and Judah.
It resulted in his casting them from his presence. Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon.
Second Kings, chapter 25. In the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon advanced on Jerusalem with his entire army. He pitched camp in front of the city and threw up earthworks round it. The city lay under siege till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. In the 4th month, on the 9th day of the month, when famine was raging in the city and there was no food for the populace, a breach was made in the city wall.
The king then made his escape under cover of dark, with all the fighting men, by way of the gate between the two walls, which is near the king's garden. The Chaldeans had surrounded the city, and made his way towards the Arabah. The Chaldean troops pursued the king and caught up with him in the plains of Jericho, where all his troops deserted. The Chaldeans captured the king and took him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, who passed sentence on him. He had Zedekiah's sons slaughtered before his eyes, then put out Zedekiah's eyes and, loading him with chains, carried him off to Babylon. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, it was in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan commander of the guard, a member of the king of Babylon's staff, entered Jerusalem. He burned down the temple of Yahweh, the royal palace and all the houses in Jerusalem. The Chaldean troops who accompanied the commander of the guard demolished the walls surrounding Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan commander of the guard deported the remainder of the population left in the city, the deserters who had gone over to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the common people. But the commander of the guard left some of the poor country people behind as vineyard workers and ploughmen. The Chaldeans broke up the bronze pillars from the temple of Yahweh, the wheeled stands and the bronze sea, which were in the temple of Yahweh, and took the bronze away to Babylon. They also took the ash containers, the scoops, the knives, the incense boats, and all the bronze furnishings used in worship. The commander of the guard also took the censers and the sprinkling bowls, everything made of gold and everything made of silver. As regards the 2 pillars, the one sea and the wheeled stands, which Solomon of bronze in all these objects. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and on it stood a capital of bronze, the height of the capital being 5 cubits. Round the capital were filigree and pomegranates, all in bronze. So also for the 2nd pillar. The commander of the guard took prisoner Seraiah the chief priest, Zephaniah the priest next in rank, and the 3 guardians of the threshold. In the city he took prisoner an official who was in command of the fighting men, 5 of the king's personal friends who were discovered in the city, the secretary to the army commander, responsible for military conscription, and 60 men of distinction discovered in the city. Nebuzaradan commander of the guard took these men and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and at Riblah in the territory of Hamath the king of Babylon had them put to death. Thus Judah was deported from its country. For the people remaining in the country of Judah whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had left behind, he appointed Gedaliah son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, as governor. When the military leaders and their men all heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah as governor, they went to him at Mizpah. Ishmael son of Nethaniah, Johanan son of Kareah, Seraiah son of Tanhumeth the Netophathite, Jazaniah the Maccathite, they and their men. To them and to their men Gedaliah swore an oath. "Do not be afraid of the Chaldeans," he said. "Stay in the country, serve the king of Babylon, and all will go well with you." But in the 7th month, Ishmael son of Nethaniah, son of Elishama, who was of royal descent, and 10 men with him, came and murdered Gedaliah, as well as the Judeans and Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. Then all the people, high and low, with the military leaders, set off and went to Egypt, being afraid of the Chaldeans. In the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, Evil-Merodach king of Babylon, in the year he came to the throne, pardoned Jehoiakim king of Judah and released him from prison. He treated him with kindness and allotted him a seat above those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim laid aside his prisoner's garb, and for the rest of his life always ate at the king's table. And his upkeep was permanently ensured by the king, day after day, for the rest of his life.